Genesis is one of my favorite sculptures by Donald DeLue. He was around 70 years old when he did this sculpture. And what you see here is the application of his heroic style to a theme from the Bible. God the Father throwing the stars across the heavens at the beginning of time. Welcome to the Minnesota Museum of Art in St. Paul. My name is Roger Arvid Anderson. I'm one of 3 sculptors included in the show titled Mythic Sculpture. The other 2 sculptors are Paul Manship and Donald DeLue. All 3 of us represent 3 generations of American sculpture, 3 sculptors who have particularly involved ourselves with the themes of mythology. Paul Manship represents the taste of the first part of the century. I represent the tastes and developments of the latter part of the century, and Donald DeLue represents the middle part of the century. In this case, I'm standing in front of Donald DeLue's sculpture, The Spirit of American Youth. It's hard to believe, but this is the intermediate study for the giant version, which is 4 times human height, which is now installed at Omaha Beach in Normandy. I met Donald DeLue in the middle 1980s, and I visited his sculpture studios in Leonardo, New Jersey. And we had some lovely conversations and took some strolls, and he took me back to a sort of ramshackle garage where he had stored some of his original plasters. Sitting amid all the dust and the debris, just glowing in white plaster, was this cosmic head, which he designed in the mid-40s. It's an extraordinary piece. This is a gold-leafed bronze. It really glows. The furrows of the brow, the lightning bolts in the hairline stress the sort of cosmic force that he's trying to represent. One thing that's interesting here, and that I'd like to mention, one of the problems of sculptors, which Donald faced and I've faced, is trying to have one's originals realized in bronze. As I say, he told me he really wanted to see this piece cast, and he had watched other sculptors of his generation die, their relatives come with a dumpster, and all their work destroyed, thrown away. And he hoped he would not have that happen to him. Fortunately, through some extraordinary patronage by John Axelrod. These pieces were cast before he died, and I'm thrilled to see this, having seen the original plaster, now in really glorious bronze. Donald DeLue, Paul Manship, and myself all share a love of the animals in mythology. Here we have Donald DeLue treating the same motif of Zeus, or the Roman name Jupiter, having changed himself into the bull. Here, the bull is on his way to see Europa, cavorting in the clouds. Donald has particularly expressed a frolicking quality. We still see the dynamic musculature that we associate with Donald's style. And in this case, he's chosen a lovely silverish patina, which gives it that floating feeling what one associates going through the clouds. On my first visit to Donald DeLue's studio, as I entered the main room, centered in one of the corners was a plaster original of this piece, Icarus, in this case, falling in space. I told Donald, this is absolutely masterful, and he nodded. Yes, he too considered this one of the masterpieces of his early period. This he designed in the 30s. And it's based on the theme of Icarus. Icarus and his father, Daedalus, lived on the island of Crete, and Daedalus was the architect of the labyrinth. Daedalus and Icarus, wanting to escape King Minos, who had him build the labyrinth, they decided the only way they could get off the island was by fashioning wings to fly, which they made out of wax with feathers. Now Daedalus told his son to follow him, not too close to the waves and not too close to the sun, but to fly midway. Unfortunately, Icarus got tempted to fly higher. He felt adventuresome and flew too close to the sun. The sun melted the wings, the feathers drooped, and then he flew downwards into space and was drowned in the waters. The story is often used as an example, and this is the purpose of mythology. It teaches a lesson. And here we can think of the Greek mean of balance, of not too much. In this case, Icarus did not listen to his father. He went too far. The sun burnt his wings, and he fell to his death. Paul Manship's Europa and the Bull is a wonderful summary of both his style and his love of mythology. Here we see Europa caressing the bull. Well, the bull is Zeus, and Zeus admired Europa, who was the daughter of the king of the Phoenicians. However, the king did not appreciate Zeus's interest, and for Zeus to be able to get close to Europa, he decided to change himself into a bull and join the cattle that the king of Phoenicia owned. So he flew down to the ocean side where the cattle were cavorting in the sea, and there Europa discovered him. Here we see them caressing each other. We don't see a violent bull, we see here a very gentle composition. Notice how the piece is structured as a triangle, inside which, perfectly proportioned, the bull and Europa, with beautiful sense of line, form a wonderful silhouette. What we have here is Paul Manship is a bridge between the Beaux Art style of heavy classical folds and draperies, a bridge toward the abstracting power of modernism. And look at the folds of the dress here. This is streamlined. We're going to see this sort of streamlining sensibility take over in the 20s and 30s and was later called Art Deco. But this is the beginning. And notice the handling, again, of the simplified forms of the hair and the abstracted handling of the breasts, the arms, and she's floating over the globe. It's called Flight of Night, and it's an allegory of night fleeing the sunlight. Also, we have here that's something that I particularly relate to. Paul Manship and I both have an interest not only in archaic Greece and Greece of the golden years, but also we have an interest in other cultures. We see here in the drapery a reference to the Far East. You can see in Japanese art and Chinese art, floating musicians. They would have the same sort of flowing drapery. He's made use of that motif. He's taken it, streamlined it even more, and turned it into a particularly modern statement. One of the points I like to make about mythology is that myths are alive today. And what do I mean by that? Well, in this case, we have the Minotaur. The Minotaur is one of the most famous myths of ancient Greece, of the half-human, half-bull monster that lived in the labyrinth. Every year, young men and young maidens were sacrificed to this creature. How is that applicable today? Well, in the case of an artist like Picasso, he took the Minotaur as his personal symbol. It's a sensual beast. The bull has always been a symbol of a certain power. He saw that in his own life, in his relations with his many mistresses, and you see it in many of his works, the prints, the paintings. For him, is a personal symbol. In my case, I'm taking it in the context as a social symbol. By that I mean, I'm talking in terms of the plague today, in which so many young men and young women are sacrificed to this mystery, in this case, a mysterious disease. So here we have the Minotaur, a brute, sensual beast, and these people are sacrificed to it. It's a symbol, but a powerful symbol. Now, I've particularly stressed the flaring eyes, and also the gold patterns are repeated in the nostrils, also flaring, and a flicker of the tongue, something we associate with sensuality, in this case, a rather violent sensuality. And in the case of the genital area, I've put the temple and perhaps the entrance here to the labyrinth. When is Theseus going to come to slay the beast? That is a question we have to ask today. That is a piece I long to do. What hero, what Dr. Salk who solved polio will come along to slay the monster? Sometimes I feel confrontational with my own works. Why do I say that? Why? Because I don't always know when I start a sculpture just what it's going to end like, what creature is going to evolve out of it, and this piece is a good example of that. The piece is called Ozymandias. The title comes from a poem by Shelley, and it is a portrait of a tyrant. I'm using the statue to represent both the idea of Ramses. Ozymandias is the Greek name of Ramses, the pharaoh of Egypt. often remembered as the Pharaoh who chased the Israelites over the Red Sea. Also, I want you to look at the face. You can also see the face of Mussolini. We have tyrants now as then, and this is a study of tyranny. This is a study of power. This is one of the subjects that captures me in much of my work. I don't do pretty things. So I want you to look at it as a piece of architecture as well as a sculpture. Recall the way the Statue of Liberty is used. Now, if you look closely, you can see there's a little balcony here on the cheek. You can step out on that balcony and look over the vast vistas. Of course, the vast vistas once held this man's empire. Now it's gone. All that remains is his statue. This is an interesting piece in the development of my work. It's called California Zen Master. Again, another example of a piece that once I began it, I had one idea, but it didn't end up quite as I expected. And I actually welcome that spontaneity in my work. This I started in 1980. It was at the height of what you call the punk movement, which still somewhat exists. But at that time, the costumes were new, and this whole frontispiece here started out to be a little bit of a reliquary drawn from the European Middle Ages or early Renaissance. I also wanted to combine the feeling that the Japanese used when they did portraits of their Zen monks. However, California, we definitely have to have some sunglasses. And at that time, pyramid power was fashionable. So I took the pyramid and made a little cap of it. And I sort of treated it as something you might call funk punk. Well, now when I look at it, the piece is a little more serious than I expected. And in certain respects, it's still telling me its story. You'll notice here the drip pattern. In terms of my education as a kid in Minnesota, I was in high school the wild abstract expressionist. When everyone else was doing little realist things, I was splashing and dashing. And I haven't lost my feel for that. Then you can see again architectural elements. My love of architecture started as a child. I've often said that some children are born readers, some are born athletes. I was born a builder. And I have a series here that I call Temples and Towers. Now, as I was saying, mythology includes, as we know, landscape, Arcadia, Valhalla, great characters, Zeus, the Minotaur. Now we also have great buildings. In October of 1989, I had 20 pedestals lined up. I had done 20 buildings in this series. The earthquake destroyed all but 2. When I looked over the destruction in my workshop, there were many temples all along the floor, split up in many pieces. I started picking up the geometry of the different portions of the wood and started playing with it. And very gradually, this evolved into the Owl Temple. In the same way that the Owl Temple has a zoomorphic character, this one does as well. In falconry, the falcon often wears a hooded cap before it's released and has a slight feather on top. Now here I'm playing with an imaginary sensibility. This, while it's called falcon head, has an abstracted sense. You can see the beak here, but also it's a temple where maybe the falconers would come on this large balustrade up here to release their birds for the hunt. Again, one lets the imagination play with the mysteries of these buildings. In a certain respect, this building nearly killed me while I was preparing this for this show. One of the tools, while I was grinding, hit a rough spot and jumped from my hand and cut through my clothes right into the pectoral over my heart. As I say, I was very lucky it didn't go any deeper. I just have a healing gash over my heart right now. certain respects, the falcon took a bite out of me. The stalactite, the temple next to this again is made out of a destroyed temple. And then to the right of it is the one piece that survived the earthquake. And I felt a certain special obligation that this one should be in bronze in this show. When you look at this series, I think you can see a particularly American statement. Why do I say that? The skyscraper is really very much a particularly American architectural statement. Also, my use of these temples and towers, my references to the American skyscraper, especially from the Deco period, but also you're going to see a certain feeling for Mesoamerican proportions. Again, my childhood love of the Mayas, the Incas, the Aztecs, and Native American symbols and art, you can see picked up in this. I tell people when they look at these buildings, don't think of them as architectural models that they could actually be built. These are meant to be evocative. Look at them, study. Wander up their stairwells. Find a story for them. You be the character to occupy these buildings. Bucephalus has a rather specific story in the sense that I was having Christmas dinner once with William Smith, the associate conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And he has a love for horses and language, and we were talking about the poetry of the names of famous horses. And for some reason, we just couldn't remember the name of Alexander the Great's horse. And finally, after much searching our minds, we recalled it was Bucephalus. Well, the next year, when William Smith came to San Francisco for Christmas dinner, and I again joined him, I had a surprise. There was Bucephalus for him to see. And the whole conversation had led me to want to do this bronze. I studied horse heads very specifically on this, just to get the right structure, and then I gave it the Greek crest, as you see in the back of it. This piece is called Luna. I've seen this character as representing the sublime movements of the moon. As a child, I had a great love of ancient Egypt, in particular the story of Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti. They had 6 daughters, and in the late 70s, I did a series of big watercolors that I called The Daughters of Nefertiti. And then I decided I would do one in bronze. And this is a portrait of the eldest daughter, Mary Totten. She's an elegant creature. She's very lean. This is a sublime character that I wanted her to have. When you look from the side, you can see the delicate breasts of an adolescent. I wanted her to have that feeling of being enigmatic, like the moon. This piece I call Mandrake. I treat it in many ways as a house guardian. We live in times of great insecurity. This is a piece that you'd have in your entryway to guard against the demons, wherever they come from. That's why he's powerful. He has this masked effect, yet he's on your side. He's to defend you. This is an important piece for me. It shows a number of developments in my work. One, when I started sculpture. I was very poor, story of most sculptors, and I couldn't afford to do molds, which is one of the steps. And bronzes of this scale have to be cast hollow. So I decided I would design them hollow, at least to get one cast. And this piece was originally hollow. It was made out of sheet wax, which I say I constructed rather than modeled. Well, as it turned out, I had some finances. I took it to the mold maker, and molds are made with rubber and then a big plaster casing. The rubber was poured in the top. Well, the pressure of the rubber inside the casing was so great, it crushed the piece. And the mold maker called me and said she had some rather sad news. When I went to see it, my head just dropped, and I had to reconstruct it. I mean, the pieces were there. This particular sheet had cracked along this line. I liked the sheet because it reminded me of a moon or lunar or space-age landscape. And when I came to put it back together and I had this final crack to resolve, I looked back and I said, well, in the development of Earth's history, isn't that what happens? The Earth fractures from an earthquake, or we have sudden rains and the waters find a flow and establish a channel and eventually a gorge. I said, if nature meant for this to happen, let's let it be there. And I think it's a stronger piece. I treat Mandrake as the right side of three pieces I call a triptych. On the left side, we have a piece that I call Emissary. This is a piece of an entirely different feel. We don't have the martial aspects that we see in Mandrake. We have a very solemn, peaceful character coming, carrying a message in the vestments with an extraordinary formal mask. It doesn't have a special face. Again, we're talking about a ceremonial visage with these goggles. Now, this whole field comes from my interest in space-age technology, science fiction, as we see it in the covers of different books or in Hollywood movies. And this has been a big interest of mine, as well as you're going to see a hint of the Orient here in the vestments, and this one in particular. Referring to the movies, this piece has a special inference. In 1982, in January, we had some terrible storms in San Francisco. So terrible that, in fact, when I did this piece, I started it during a 36-hour nonstop torrential rains. I couldn't get out of the house. At the same time, the news was announcing that the rains were so bad that mudslides were literally taking away houses from the hillsides, and over 40 people had already been killed. So when I thought about the disasters, the power of the weather, I recalled Eisenstein's film, Alexander Nevsky. And there's a famous charge of the Teutonic Knights across the ice. I thought, well, I'm going to take this whole field of weather, but make it into an anthropomorphic creature. And this is how I chose some wax sheets with this cloud pattern. I thought I would put this over the helmet, which recalls the helmets of the Teutonic Knights. And then I also chose a sheet here, which has, in abstract form, a cloud covering the sun with a lightning bolt. Again, you can see cloud patterns in the shoulder flaps. And as I say, this creature is coming forward, carrying the storm. Now, when I do these pieces, I have giant areas inside that I clean out and I put in poems, in the case, poems that I have written. And inside this piece, I have a poem of a number of stanzas called In the Vivid Rain. I call them archaeological teases. Maybe in 500, 600, 700 years, if this is dug up, and the archaeologists turn it over and clean out the inside, they're going to have a little fun. They're going to find a message. In the vivid rain, I go out to those still standing, who have stood in the vivid rain, unbuttoned or cloaked, silent, brave. I admire the solemnity of the patient, who know clearly the peal past reverberation establishes midnight and the terrible dread of emptiness. I praise those who go about their business, yet know a touch of cold means Jack Frost has grabbed their shoulders. I am in awe of the incurable, who refuse to close their eyes when the hellcat jumps moves its paws and in one swipe unpacks their souls. I go out to those still working, stonemasons on the cathedral scaffolding, who keep their grip and hold tight despite the earthquake's roll and its assault on their will. I thank those painters, too, at the river's edge, who do not flinch from their easels when the fog mounts and the colors change. Once the memory goes, I cherish those who dive into pools of nothingness, lithe as swans. Finally, after every kind of enmity and disaster, I go out to those who still love.